Griffin, and I am chairwoman of Democratic Jewish Outreach Pennsylvania. And I am here representing the Jewish Battleground Coalition, of which DJOP is a part. The Jewish Battleground Coalition represents the states of Arizona, Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Ohio. So wherever you are from today, thank you so much for being here. I want to start by saying that today is Holocaust Remembrance Day, and I believe this is an appropriate event to honor the memories of those who died. And this is a way we never forget, because we're going to discuss how to combat anti-Semitism. We have with us some fabulous speakers. We have Congresswoman Kathy Manning. We have Andrew Goretsky from the ADL. We have Eden Cohen from A Wider Frame, and Dina Lickman-Smith, who is on the board of DJOP and who is a Holocaust educator. The way we're going to work the program is I'm going to introduce Congresswoman Manning, who's going to speak about what's happening in DC. Then I will introduce Andrew, Eden, and Dina, and so on, and there should be some time for questions at the end. So I'm going to start with Congresswoman Manning. Many of you may know her. She represents North Carolina's 6th Congressional District. She graduated from Harvard and University of Michigan Law School. She was the first woman ever to chair the board of the Jewish Federations of North America. In addition to all other committee assignments she holds, she is co-chair of the Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, which works to ensure that Congress plays a vital role in combating anti-Semitism worldwide. But before we go to Kathy, we have with us State Representative Dan Frankel, who represents Pennsylvania's 23rd District, and we have a newly formed Jewish caucus, and he's going to say a few words about that before Kathy begins. Dan?
Oh, well, thanks, Jill. Thanks to everybody for being on here today. We had a very moving Yom HaShoah commemoration in the governor's reception room this morning, bipartisan, and it was very moving. We've done it for 25 years. So anyway, we're battling anti-Semitism here. I represent the community of Squirrel Hill that suffered the awful, most significant attack, anti-Semitic attack in the history of the United States. 11 of our neighbors were murdered. I think a lot of people wanted to know what we were going to do about that, particularly be putting it in the context of what we had seen around the country with respect to groups that were targeted, whether it was the AME Church in South Carolina, the Pulse nightclub in Florida, the Sikh temple in Wisconsin, among others, Uvalde, so people want to know what are you as elected officials going to do about this? We put together a task force to address hate crimes in Pennsylvania. We had a very weak ethnic intimidation statute that was not inclusive, that omitted people from the LGBTQ community and the disability community. We wanted to make sure we added them, but we thought we needed to go further. So we also now are providing a course of civil action that didn't exist before, and adding legislation to address the weakness that we see within law enforcement across the state and with prosecutors across the state in their inability or unwillingness to identify hate crimes, even though we in Pennsylvania have seen a 65% increase in the last 5 years of the number of incidents that have been reported. We know they're underreported. We also want to put together an opportunity for those who've been convicted and incarcerated for hate-related crimes, the opportunity to be rehabilitated, to receive education, and an opportunity to correct their ways, particularly with respect to the groups that they had identified in their crimes. And finally, an opportunity that we saw of addressing the incidence of hate crimes and recruitment of students on college campuses across Pennsylvania, across the country. We know that 18-year-olds are particularly vulnerable to being recruited by hate groups who target our college campuses, but also we know that the individuals on our college campuses are targeted for harassment and assault. And we created an anonymous reporting system for that, for students and faculty, for that matter, to be able to report these incidents on campus. That is modeled after legislation that I had put in on Safe to Say with respect to sexual assault and sexual harassment on college campuses as well. We're launching this year on Monday, the 24th, which is the day that the trial will begin in Pittsburgh for the anti-Semitic murderer who attacked our community. And we're going to be having a rally and a press conference on the Capitol steps. We encourage those of you in Pennsylvania who can make it up there to please join us. Many of the family members and survivors of the Squirrel Hill attack will be with us. And the bill is I think in a place where we'll finally be able to move it. Democrats took control of the state legislature. There are lots of benefits to that. So we're going to, a bill that we couldn't get out of committee, couldn't get to the House floor, will now see the light of day. And I expect that we will be able to get it out of committee, out of the House, over to the Senate, which still has Republican members. But we've worked very hard together to get bipartisan support for this bill. And there are Republican members of the House that are supporting this, and there will be Republican co-sponsors in the Senate as well for the Senate version of this bill. So that's, one of the small ways I think we're looking to combat anti-Semitism in Pennsylvania. And I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to make that progress and have some legislative success to help address this. So,
thank you so much, Dan. And I'm going to turn it over to Congresswoman Manning to tell us what's happening at the national level. Congresswoman?
Thank you so much, Jill. I am delighted to be with all of you today. It's particularly fitting that on Yom HaShoah, I started off my day early this morning at a service in the Capitol with Jewish and non-Jewish members of Congress. Ambassador Stuart Eisenstadt was there and spoke beautifully. And we had, I believe, 9 Holocaust survivors with us, all of whom are quite elderly. And one woman, Rachel Goldstein, who is, I think 90, told her story, which was, it doesn't matter how many times you hear survivors tell how they made it through the war and what their story was. Hers was particularly moving. And I was glad I was able to be there to hear her. And now here I am at the end of my day meeting with all of you to talk about the rise in anti-Semitism. It's hard to believe that we are still having to confront this issue and not just confront it in a small way, but there's just no question that anti-Semitism is on the rise. And last October, when Congressman Ted Deutsch left the Congress to take over as the CEO of the American Jewish Committee, I was asked to take over his position as the lead co-chair of the House Bipartisan Task Force to combat anti-Semitism. And because this issue is so deeply important to me, as I know it is to all of you, I was really honored to take over that position. And I decided that in light of everything we have going on, from what happened at the Tree of Life Synagogue, what happened at the Poway Synagogue, what happened in Colleyville, Texas, those are the big ones that we talk about. But also, we've seen a rise in really unacceptable statements coming from the entertainment world, the sports world, the political world. And it has become much more acceptable to say, to make anti-Semitic comments in a very unapologetic way. And we are also seeing this rise in violent attacks. So I have decided, and my staff is helping me make this committee extremely active. And first we went out and invited all the members of Congress to join us. We have a very large contingency of members of Congress who are on the task force. We also have a larger number of members of Congress who have shown up at the meetings that we have held. And we have held, I think, 6 or 8 meetings where I've made sure that we provide interesting, informative information, because I want the members of Congress who participate in the caucus to actually learn something from what we're doing and to feel an obligation to take on efforts to combat anti-Semitism. The first meeting that I hosted in December of last year was a meeting with a delegation from the United Kingdom, and they were 2 members of parliament who came with us to talk about the work that they're doing to combat anti-Semitism and to find ways that we can learn from each other. I was actually pretty shocked to hear how much they're doing in the UK. They have an introductory session for every member of parliament to learn what anti-Semitism is, because as one of the members of parliament said to me, he said, many of our new members are quite stupid and they end up going down the rabbit hole of anti-Semitism on the internet and buying into conspiracy theories because they just don't know anything about Judaism and anti-Semitism. So they have put together quite an important session that all of their members of parliament have to go through once they become members of parliament. It's something that we are thinking about and something that I would like to do. The next meeting we had in December was with a group of Germans from the AJC and from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, a German think tank. And we learned from them what their German cabinet is doing. It has adopted a national strategy against anti-Semitism and in support of Jewish life, which I thought was interesting, not just to combat anti-Semitism, but to take an active role in supporting thriving Jewish life in Germany. We had a great discussion, again, something that our committee learned from. In December, I co-chaired a letter with Senator Jackie Rosen, and we got 125 Democratic and Republican members of Congress to sign on to our letter. The letter was to President Biden, highlighting the worldwide increase in anti-Semitism and asking him to create an interagency task force to monitor and coordinate efforts to combat anti-Semitism. And I am delighted that the president did create that interagency task force. It has been quite active. It is led by Susan Rice as one of the leaders of that interagency task force. And we are hoping to meet with them in the near future and talk with them about the strategic plan that they are putting together. I also, just by chance, on December 13th, we had put together a meeting with the FBI to get their update on their view of the rise of anti-Semitism in the US. And the day before our meeting, the FBI released its 2021 hate crimes statistics report. And I say it was particularly fortunate because that report lacked any data on anti-Semitism from New York City, Los Angeles, or the state of Florida. And to even imagine that you could have an adequate assessment of anti-Semitism with no data from New York City, Los Angeles, or the state of Florida, it's almost like the beginning of a bad Jewish joke. I just don't know what the punchline is. But because we had 2 deputy directors of the FBI, we got to ask them, what led to this lack of data? We got a very thorough analysis from them, and they put into place, they made mandatory that all incident reports on anti-Semitism be put in a new system called the NIMBR system, which requires much more data be inputted by, frankly, by the beat cop who investigates the crime or the incident, I should say. And that's it requires more input. So we had great membership attend that meeting, including Hakeem Jeffries, who is now our leader on the Democratic side. He was fabulous at the meeting. And I asked the FBI to come back to us this quarter with better data. We expressed our concern that that report was simply insufficient, and we asked them to come back to us with better data. In fact, they did very recently come back to us with a supplemental report. The first report showed no increase in anti-Semitism. The updated report that they gave us showed a 20% rise in anti-Semitism. So, and I understand from a conversation I had today that they went to great lengths to get the improved data. In fact, they sent FBI agents to each of the communities that failed. It was far more than New York, Los Angeles, and the state of Florida. They sent FBI agents to every single community that did not input data and required them to input the data. So I want to give credit to the FBI because they took our request seriously and then came up with a much fuller report that does show the problem that we know exists. Our task force then met with the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff. I have to tell you, it has been such a delight to work with him on this issue because he's just a guy who found himself in the unusual position of being able to have a real impact on anti-Semitism. He has agreed to work very closely with us, and he went with Deborah Lipstadt on a trip to Auschwitz on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and then he attended an international conference on anti-Semitism in Berlin. And I think he's doing an enormous amount to make this topic, make sure it's on everybody's radar screen. And we will continue to work with him. We actually spent a lot of time talking with him about the anti-Semitism on college campuses and at universities, because I had, just before that meeting, I had met with a group of students, a new group of Jewish students from college campuses who talked about how pervasive anti-Semitism is, not just the things we hear about, but from campus to campus. There's just an unbelievable amount of anti-Semitism and an effort to prevent Jewish students from participating in student body life and, frankly, participating in Jewish life on campus. So we then scheduled a meeting with the Assistant Secretary of Education, Catherine Lamont, because I wanted to discuss with her what's going on college campuses and on what I think has been a delay in a rulemaking that is supposed to be finished, giving greater clarity to university administrators on what they are supposed to do about anti-Semitism on their college campuses. Catherine was quite good in our meeting, and I'm actually going to speak at an event with her next week in Chapel Hill, where they will have a gathering of college administrators on anti-Semitism. Last meeting I will talk about, I told you we've been very, very active on this. We met with Deborah Lipstadt and a group of representatives from a variety of European countries, from Denmark, from Germany, from the EU, from the OAS, and from the UK. And we talked with all of them about the strategies that their countries have put in place to combat anti-Semitism. We had quite a good showing of members of Congress at that meeting. And I think they were impressed with the active role that governments throughout Europe are taking to combat anti-Semitism. And the comment that was made that I think stuck with so many of us is, it should not be the job of the Jewish community to combat anti-Semitism. It should be the job of the government in any democracy to combat anti-Semitism. And as we all know, the hatred that begins with anti-Semitism never stops with anti-Semitism. It ends up undermining the very foundations of democracy. So That is a report on what we have going on.
You are doing a lot of very, very good and important work. We are now going to hear from Andrew Goretsky. Andrew Goretsky is the Regional Director for ADL of Philadelphia. Prior to joining ADL, he served as the Dean of Students at Arcadia University. Before that, he was at George Washington University and the University of Maryland, where he worked on diversity and inclusion. And he's going to speak to us today about the state of anti-Semitism. Go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you very much. I'm going to actually work on sharing my screen at the moment. And there we go. Do you see the slide without my notes? Just
Yes.
making sure. All right, perfect.
Yes.
So as mentioned, I come out of higher education. I've worked in higher education for 23 years before joining ADL a year ago, and really started looking at ADL following the Tree of Life massacre. I have a very vivid memory of bringing my son to Hebrew school the next day and the lump in my throat when I dropped him off. Following that, as I know we all felt the impact, and not nearly to the level of those who were the victims and directly impacted by that heinous act. And then also what brought me to ADL is, after working 23 years in higher education, my concern about rising anti-Semitism on college campuses. And so for those of you who don't know ADL as well, I just want to briefly go over a couple of pieces before I jump into the audit of anti-Semitism data. We were established in 1913 to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all, because our founders knew then, over 100 years ago, what we know now, that you can't fight one form of hate and bigotry without fighting all forms. We have three primary centers out of our national office. We have our Center on Extremism, which is the leading expert, the non-governmental agency that is a leading expert on extremist activity. We have our Center for Technology and Society, which fights online hate, and of particular interest to me, as my research is in my doctoral research is in student engagement in mobile technology, and I have particular interest in the proliferation of anti-Semitism and hate online. And we have our Center for Anti-Semitism Research, and I am one of 25 regional directors. We have regional offices across the country working with law enforcement, responding to incidents on the ground, and providing education, non-bias education, and doing our fundraising development activities. And I've shared, we combat extremism, we disrupt online hate and harassment, we work to protect civil rights. As was already discussed by the Congresswoman, securing democracy and the importance of a democracy that is functioning is important to all minority groups. We challenge bias, bigotry, and discrimination, and we fight anti-Semitism. Let me jump into what I know you all are looking for and interested to hear from me about. We just released our 22 audit of anti-Semitic incidents. 2022 was the worst year for anti-Semitic incidents since the ADL began recording more than 4 decades ago. There were a total of 3,697 incidents reported across the United States in 2022, which is an increase of 36% compared to 2021. And 2021, as you all know, was also a record-setting year. In fact, this is the 3rd time in the past 5 years that the year-end total has been the highest number ever recorded. That includes 111 violent assaults. That's a 26% increase from the previous year. 2,298 incidents of harassment, which was a 29% increase. 1,288 incidents of vandalism, which was a 51% increase from the previous year. And 589 of these incidents targeted Jewish institutions, such as synagogues, Jewish community centers, Jewish schools, which is an increase of 12% from the previous year. This data confirms what Jewish communities have seen firsthand across the country, and it corresponds with a notable rise in anti-Semitic attitudes in America. And we do a different survey on that, which I'm going to share in a moment. Some incidents were directly linked to events in the news. Ye, the artist formerly known as Kanye West, was directly referenced in 59 of these incidents. These highly publicized anti-Semitic statements last year both resonated with and motivated various perpetrators. And then specifically in Pennsylvania, we had 114 incidents of harassment and vandalism. We did not have any assaults in Pennsylvania in 2022. But that is an increase from 69 incidents the previous year in 2021. Like many of you, we at ADL and ADL Philadelphia are deeply disturbed that the anti-Semitic attacks reached historic levels in 2022, following that historic level in 2021. And these findings are a stark reminder that anti-Semitism is a clear, present, and growing danger in America, and we still need leaders to continue to speak out. There's no one particular reason that we've seen the increase in surge in incidents. Looking at some of the significant areas of surges, we have had a high volume of organized white supremacist propaganda activity. Of all the national incidents, 852 incidents were white supremacist propaganda, and that was an increase from 102% in 2021. These are the flyerings and stickerings that you hear about in the news. Of specific note, Pennsylvania in 2021 had the highest amount of white supremacist propaganda in the country. This last year, we went down to 5th, but still at historic levels. About 12% to 20% of white supremacist propaganda is anti-Semitic related. A lot of that is targeted towards other communities as well. 494 incidents nationally occurred in K through 12 schools, which was a 49% increase from 2021. College campuses recorded 219 anti-Semitic incidents, which was a 41% increase. Deeply troubling is the increase in attacks specifically on Orthodox Jews, which was recorded at 59 incidents, which was an increase of 67% from 2021. And then bomb threats and threats towards Jewish institutions. We specifically pulled this out because there were 91 incidents of bomb threats and threats towards institutions in 2022, an increase from 8 in 2021. So a very significant number. And that number does include the hostage crisis at the synagogue in Colleyville, Texas, which happened early in the year in 2022. Wanted to target in a little bit on the assaults component and share some information here. The 111 incidents of assault in 2022, this is the 25% increase over 2021. But it's really, I think, the more startling number. It's a 66% increase from the average of assault over the last 5 years. 139 victims is an increase of 6% over the 130 victims in 2021, but it's a 231% increase over the 42 victims in 2020. There was one fatality stemming from anti-Semitic assault in 2022. On October 5th, 2022, a University of Arizona professor, Thomas Meixner, was shot and killed on campus by a former student. This student allegedly targeted Professor Meixner in part because he believed the professor was Jewish, and the former student expressed conspiratorial anti-Semitic beliefs online. I put this person's name because we have too many numbers here, and we need to remember that there are people behind each of these numbers. 4 of the anti-Semitic assaults in 2022 included references to Israel or Zionism on the part of perpetrators. There were 15 anti-Semitic assaults related to Israel in 2021, 0 in 2020, and 3 in 2019. Remember, this is specific to assaults. That does not include the harassment and vandalism numbers. And 2 of the anti-Semitic assaults in 2022 were committed by known individuals with extremist ties. And none of the anti-Semitic assaults in 2021 had known extremist ties. But as I shared, these are all numbers. And one of the things we work with in the regional offices are individual stories. We had 100+ incidents of anti-Semitism in the audit in 2022, but our office alone managed over 500 complaints of various discrimination and bias that were reported to us. And I'm going to share anonymously with some generalized information, personal stories here, so that you can understand and see and hear the experience of the people who've reported incidents to us. And I'm going to do this in the first person. So the first one, I'm a 14-year-old boy attending a local high school in our region in the suburbs of Philadelphia. A friend of mine just reported that some other kids in the school while on the bus went up to him and put the Heil Hitler salute and said Heil Hitler to him. His mom told my mom, and my mom asked me if I've experienced anti-Semitism at school. I told her that it is in the air, that anti-Semitism is in the air, and I hear it all the time. She asked me what I meant by that and why I haven't said anything. I said, well, nothing's going to happen if I report it, and I'm afraid that it will just get worse. My friend just reported it, and now he's getting dirty looks from everyone in school, and I'm starting to get those looks too, because people assume that either he or I reported the situation. My mom asked me what has happened, that it is, quote, in the air. Kids regularly make jokes about Jews in the oven in Auschwitz, or will comment about trying not to get Jewed down when negotiating trading video games or Pokemon cards. I find that if I ignore it, it's better than if I say something. The second one, I'm a female student who's a freshman at a local college or university. I consider myself progressive. I speak out against racist incidents and systemic racism. I'm concerned about our environment and climate change. I went to a club meeting and was wearing my Jewish star, and someone asked me if I was Jewish, then said to me before I could answer, you must support Israel since you're Jewish, and since you do, you can't be here. We don't allow genocide supporters at our events. Now, I love Israel. I've always loved Israel, but I'm not happy with the policies of the government. I'm actually quite disgusted by them at the moment. I wish I could vote there, but I cannot. I'm an American citizen. I'm not Israeli. This person wouldn't even engage me in the conversation. Now I get nasty direct messages on my Instagram account from these anonymous people, but I know that they're students here. My Hillel has tried to be supportive, but I do not understand how people can shut me out so easily. I think I may need to transfer to another school, and this was my number one choice when I applied. This third one, I work in a synagogue. At least once a week, I get a phone call. I work in a synagogue, and at least once a week, I get a phone call where someone on the other end says, die, you dirty kike, or Hitler did not do a good enough job. I'm tired of it. The first time it scared me, but now it's just become commonplace. I actually prefer to get these messages rather than the verbal or email bomb threats. We had 4 of those bomb threats last year, and I'm glad that they were nothing, but we have to take each one seriously. Those can be so disruptive. Part of me just wants to ignore them given the disruption, but God forbid that it's one time it's the real one. We've seen what can happen. We have to take them seriously. And then the last one I want to just share is a personal story of me with my son. I have an 11-year-old who plays a game called Among Us. And he was sitting, he's not allowed to play online games unless I'm in the room, although he's going to be moving into teenager years. So I don't know that he's always following that these days. But he was in a room and in a chat room, and somebody, all of a sudden he goes, oh, I'm out of here. And I asked him, hey, bud, what happened? And he told me that somebody made a pretty, and I'm not going to repeat it, a very heinous anti-Semitic and racist comment. I'm upset he experienced it. I'm happy he knew to get out of there. When I asked him, did he report it? He said, no, Dad, I don't know how. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. And I know I'm running, I've got a couple of minutes, just a couple of more things to go through here. I want to also mention our anti-Semitic attitude survey, because we talked about the audit and the types of incidents, but we also do a survey that looks and assesses attitudes amongst Americans around anti-Semitism, and we test for 11 or more anti-Jewish tropes. It's something we've done with the University of Chicago. The latest that we did was in 2022. We don't do this one every year. The last time we did it was in 2019. And we saw an increase where 20% of Americans believe in 6 or more anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, demonstrating extensive anti-Semitic prejudice and putting them in our category of deeply infected with anti-Semitic hatred. This is significantly higher than the 11% that ADL found in 2019, and the highest level we've seen in 3 decades. We do see that there was a higher number back in '64. And that we also found that more than 3/4 of Americans do believe in at least one conspiracy theory or tropes about Jewish people. And 3% believed in all 11. put that in perspective, that means about 10 million Americans believe in all 11 tropes and conspiracy theories, while there's only about 7 to 8 million Jewish people in America. So the study also showed that 20% said Jews have too much power, 21% agreed that Jews don't care about anyone but themselves, 17% are uncomfortable spending time with persons who are supportive of Israel. And that the big piece here is that there is those people who believe in anti-Semitic tropes, it is strongly correlated with a lack of knowledge about Jews or Judaism. So people who have no knowledge or have not interacted tend to believe more in tropes, and that seems to make sense. I know we're going to talk more about actions, but I just want to share some quick insights in my first year. First is report. As I've been in this role a year talking with community members, so many people do not report, and people need to report so that we know the scope of the issue and the problem. The education piece is important, and I'm encouraging many people to talk to their schools as well as their places of work to ensure that Judaism and Jewish culture is incorporated into DEI work. In many places, and especially my experience in higher ed, that has not happened over the last few years, and I think that that's an important piece. I have to talk about with my own research, speak with your children about their experiences online. If they haven't seen it in real life, they're seeing it there. And then one of the beauties of this job, as much as I see the day-to-day and those individual stories, I then get the blessing and the opportunity to see all the people that speak out and are against the hate and rising anti-Semitism. And as much as the voices are louder for anti-Semitism and hate, I can tell you that the numbers of people against it are still significantly greater. They all just need to speak out more. And speak out in greater numbers and as a community. And so we just need to encourage our leaders and ourselves to do it. Looking forward to answering questions at the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Next up, we have Eden Cohen, and this leads in nicely because we've been talking about college campuses and youth. Eden is the Senior Advisor to Special Envoy Combating Anti-Semitism. And she is the founder and president of A Wider Frame, a new media company that provides quick, easy, and comprehensive Jewish news. She is launching another Jewish multimedia company with journalist Jordan Tilchin that's geared towards Gen Z and millennial Jews. So why don't we hear from her as she can talk to us from what's going on in the younger community. Thank you so much, Eden, for being here. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be on this panel with you all. And just to zoom out a little bit, I'll tell you a bit about my background and why I created A Wider Frame, my work with Noah Tishby over the last year. And I'll give you some context for my work in this space and the trends that I'm noticing. And because today's Yom HaShoah, I'll also mention that I grew up in Pittsburgh living with my grandfather, my mom's father, who was the sole Holocaust survivor of his family, which really had an immense impact on me. He was the sole survivor, as I mentioned, and his pain and life story really cemented the importance, even at a young age, that Israel is unequivocally essential to the fundamental survival of the Jewish people. So my father actually also taught about the Holocaust in his free time with any survivor he could find at elementary and high schools throughout Pittsburgh. And he's actually started this because a student council president in Pittsburgh at a local high school was a Holocaust denier, and this dates back 25 years. So anyway, I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison right before every Jew on campus was held to a litmus test on Israel. And I actually went on Birthright right before the massive campaigns began demonizing it. And I stayed in Israel for about a year afterwards, which is really where my interest in all of this began. I paid close, almost singular attention to Israel and Jewish world news, taking note of the disturbing rise in anti-Semitism across the world, and especially how it was shape-shifting into the demonization of Israel. I went to law school in Los Angeles, and I actually ended up working in the entertainment world for several years prior to starting my work in this space. I faced regular anti-Semitism, I would say more left-wing anti-Israel sentiment at work. I'll never forget when someone who I worked with blamed modern anti-Semitism on the state of Israel's existence. So I became very frustrated at work, and I was seeing it a lot in the entertainment world. But during the course of my legal career, I started to put more and more time into like Jewish efforts and advocacy work until it really became all of my free time, which it is now. And I realized that my work with the various organizations and in educating those around me who were largely unengaged and uninformed was not enough. I was seeing the real life consequences of this anti-Semitic libels being spread online, the systematic dehumanization and isolation of Jews from society once again. So in early 2020, I started this digital media company to deliver quick and easy Jewish and Israel-related news in an attempt to inform others, especially young people who are very uninformed, of the seriously disturbing trends I was noticing, and also really to give young Jews a resource in order to use their voice to combat the flood of lies and libels they were facing every day. I really saw a huge void in Jewish media that looked cool and that young people connected with. So I started this to engage the young and the unengaged who weren't really reading Jewish news. And also Western news isn't even reporting on most of the anti-Semitic attacks that we're seeing, or certainly Jewish historical literacy whatsoever. So I'm also launching another media company, as you said, Jill, in the coming months, actually to gear it towards much younger people, because I think this is something that we're lacking seriously in this space. We have a problem with Jewish media coming across to young people as sort of chronically uncool, and just they need something that they connect with, which is why I started it. Throughout my work in this space, I met Noah Tishby, amongst other amazing people, and she asked me to come on board as her senior advisor and chief of staff in her role as Israel's anti-Semitism envoy. So that is what have been doing for the past year with her and the past few years in the media. And what I can tell you from the past few years working day and night in the waters of the oldest, most enduring hatred is that it is very ugly out there for young people. As Andrew mentioned, as Congresswoman Manning has mentioned, it is really, really bad. And what I'm seeing a lot on social media is that the 2,000-year back catalog of anti-Semitic tropes, stereotypes, and accusations have been transferred from the Jew onto the Jewish state or to Zionists. And so long as the explicit target of hatred is Israel or Zionists rather than Jews, then in the classroom and on social media and in the workplace, it gets a free pass. And this is backed up by a lot of evidence. Andrew has mentioned some. I'll tell you that research by Israel's Ministry of Diaspora Affairs has found that, I think it was from like May, ever since they started looking after the May 2021 conflict when things really blew up online, but they found that every month since that nearly 3/4 of online anti-Semitism takes the form of anti-Israel hatred. And that's using definitions that we accept as anti-Semitism. And then there's plenty of other research showing that we're actually losing young Jews to this plague, who are increasingly harboring anti-Jewish sentiments about our people and about the Jewish state. And so to all of these examples, and to Andrew's many examples as well, anti-Semitism shows up in young people's lives everywhere they are, in the classroom, even as early as elementary education. And we're getting a lot of reports about that here in California, on social media, which they're on obviously all day, in pop culture, from celebrities to politicians, and in the workplace. And survey after survey continues to show this, not that we even need them anymore at this point to know this. More than half of Jewish college students in the US reported experiencing or witnessing anti-Semitism on campus. A recent survey of members of Jewish fraternities and sororities in the US showed that 1 in 5 of the students hide their Jewish identities in campus settings, which is incredibly disturbing. Hate crimes against Jewish students are at an all-time high across the nation. Hate crimes against Jews overall are at an all-time high. Like overwhelmingly per capita, hate crimes are targeting Jews more than any other people. I personally, I'll just share one little story, what I've been dealing with personally. I was supposed to do an event at Columbia's School of Social Work with 2 other friends and also Jewish educators, and to speak on a panel about anti-Semitism, which got the attention of the anti-Zionist crowd at Columbia. They protested us coming. They made horrific lies about us. Some compared us to Nazis, to the head of the DEI administration in the school, and to which they didn't suffer any consequences for saying so. The panel has been postponed endlessly into oblivion, with the school making every excuse in the book as to why we couldn't speak there. And today on Yom HaShoah, they announced that they would host a panel with an anti-Zionist Jew who frames Jews as oppressors. So that's what they are, that's what they're pushing instead. And this is happening so frequently on college campuses that it's impossible to even keep up with. It's like whack-a-mole. And then a few other points is that most younger Jews, I think a lot of them don't actually recognize anti-Semitism, even when it hits them in the face. And that's for several reasons, including lack of historical literacy or any education on the matter. They see it coming from their favorite actors, models, rappers, athletes, politicians, and especially when it's about Israel, they think it's true. So I think I agree with all of Andrew's recommendations. I think, to one point I wanted to make about the DEI education, because I'm not sure we'll have a chance to get to this, is that a lot of schools now have these very, very bloated DEI departments, and they're pushing this intellectual orthodoxy that's being imposed. And I'm not sure if everyone knows what DEI programming is. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion, and most big universities have this. And it's basically they're pushing a watered down Marxism, where instead of dividing the worlds into classes, they divide the world into oppressed and oppressors. And Jews always fall in the line of the oppressor. And then it becomes a matter of equity, which is treating Jews roughly because they're in the oppressor group. And that's the justice here. So instead of, I think we also need to rethink how these DEI departments work. And instead of pushing this orthodoxy, and one more thing, Noah and I looked at a ton of research over the past year. And one piece of research that I found especially telling was that someone looked at, from like the top 100 schools, all the DEI administrators at like several big universities, and of all the public social media profiles of these DEI administrators, they found something like 80% of them harbored anti-Semitic views and pushed them openly on social media. So that's what we're facing with. So I think, firstly, the entire premise of DEI on these schools is problematic, but at the very least, we need to call for a halt to these programs until they're restructured to ensure they pursue legitimate goals of welcoming diverse students on campus and helping them feel included without this hateful anti-Semitic behavior. And then I think, we need to rethink approach on a number of issues, social media and education being 2 of the biggest and most important. And I think especially widening the context of Jewish history and anti-Semitism beyond the Holocaust, which is already woefully undertaught and understood, but making sure that students have context for anti-Semitism in today's world. And I think we need to meet these young people where they're at. We need to take off the blindfolds and recognize what they're going to face and prepare education and campaigns to combat the constant lies and libels that they face. And at the last task force meeting, which was incredibly important, we talked about how can we get the social media companies who actually profit, out of pushing this hate through their algorithm. How do we get them to stop it? So I think it's a matter of government regulation. And then, of course, an approach to deal with both elementary and higher education.
Thank you so much, Eden. And last but not least, we have DJOP board member, Dina Lichtman-Smith. Dina is on the board of the Holocaust Awareness Educational Museum of Philadelphia. She has extensive experience as a Holocaust educator and has spoken to students across the nation. She's the daughter of Holocaust survivors, and she herself was born in a displaced persons camp. So Dina, why don't you take it away and tell us about your experiences as a Holocaust educator? And you're on mute, Dina. There you go. You're on mute again, Dina.
Yeah. Am I off mute now?
Yes, you can speak now. Yes.
Thank you, Jill. And I am learning so much from the speakers. What I'm going to talk to you about is different. I actually grew up with two survivors who went through so many camps and so many horrendous stories. Okay, I speak to schools, to industry, I've spoken to the military, I've spoken to hospital organizations, okay? And what I talk about is that Polish Jews who were prisoners in ghettos, okay, in Auschwitz, with my father having a tattoo number, I talk about what it was like growing up with them who lost everybody. They lost everyone in their family, okay? One of the things that happened is the Nazis kept unbelievably detailed records of their Jewish prisoners. I know in what camps my parents went. I know from where they started. I know what camp they went to next. I know how they were transported out. I know what they did work-wise at each of the camps. I know who liberated them. I have pictures of me in Bergen-Belsen. Okay. Yet with all this documentation, it is hearing from actual survivors or people like me, children and grandchildren, that appears to have the greatest impact. Your speakers talked about all the research. Well, there has been research done by the Claims Conference, by the Pew Research on Holocaust education, on knowledge. And what's scary is that so many Gen Z and millennials don't know anything about it, or what they know is totally wrong, or they believe the lies. Okay. In all of my speaking, I try to immerse my listeners, and usually it is a classroom or an auditorium of about 200 children, kids in sixth grade or above. I couple my talk with rigorous detail in documentation and accompany the documentation with my parents' experiences. One of the things I learned through years of giving speeches is that, you know what people remember? They remember stories. They may not remember details, they may not remember numbers, but it creates a connection between the speaker and the audience. Stories make a point, whether the decision is good or bad. We all have our own stories, and stories make memories. So with that, let me give you two stories, okay? The first Black man my father ever saw was a Black US soldier who liberated him from Dachau. That experience, the experience of having a Black US soldier give my father food, impacted him for the rest of his life. Needless to say, there was no prejudice in my house. My father's best friends were always Black. He joined a union. But I think about that story, and I can tell you, the people that I've spoken to over the years, when they see me, guess what they remember? They remember that story. My mom was sent from a camp outside of Hamburg to Bergen-Belsen. She got sick with typhus. Typhus kills about 40% of the people that were sick. The two people that most people have heard of is Anne Frank, who died of typhus in Bergen-Belsen, like my mom. Obviously, my mother survived. When students hear that story, especially ones who are reading the diary of Anne Frank, it changes everything. The people feel things when they can connect to that. Okay. All right. I remember talking to my brothers when we grew up. And my brother got beat up all the time. He went to a Jewish school. And at this point, we lived in a public housing project. How many Jews do you know who live in a project? Okay. And the thing that was so awful about that was not so much that he got beat up, but that the fathers of these boys would come outside and they would scream, "Kill him, get the dirty Jew, get him." Again, the students who listened to me, who understood this, the workers, I've talked to healthcare companies, okay, that they remembered. And they asked amazing questions about all of that. Is there a shocking lack of knowledge about the Holocaust? Yes, with many people knowing almost nothing. You know, as I said, whether it's the Pew Research, whether it's the Claims Conference, who looks at millennials and looks at Gen X, Gen Zs, they don't know. They don't know how many Jews died. They can't name a camp. And some of them actually think the Jews started the whole thing. Okay. Pennsylvania does not mandate Holocaust education. Yet when the Claims Conference did their survey of the 50 states with millennials and Gen Zs on how much they knew about the Holocaust, Pennsylvania came in fourth without mandated education. You know what I think? The last 12 years, the Holocaust Awareness Museum and Education Center has been giving survivor sessions to over 200,000 students in Pennsylvania and another 150,000 students all over the world. I think those live presentations by survivors might have something to do with the increase in Holocaust awareness and therefore, hopefully, a sensitivity to anti-Semitism. Let me also tell you that I sat in on a Zoom with one of our survivors who was Polish, and he spoke to 200 Polish kids, and they asked him unbelievable questions. In yesterday's New York Times, there was an article on a new generation of Holocaust storytellers. It said that telling a story about a person or a family of survivors and their journey rehumanizes and revigorates history. I like the analogy. We are like secondhand smoke, one level removed, but just as toxic and as impactful. People remember stories. It changes the listeners. Teaching the Holocaust must now include what led up to it. It isn't enough just to talk about the Holocaust. How can a country like Germany in 1933 democratically vote for Hitler? And how does that relate to what is happening now? I will tell you, most of the schools I talk to, they don't want anything political. And yet, when Kanye made his ridiculous remark, we were inundated with school requests for programs. We could not fill all the requests because the teachers really did think learning about the Holocaust would somehow modify the anti-Semitism, which now looks like anti-Zionism and anti-Israel. When a sports figure did the same thing, we were getting calls to teach again as many classes as possible. Some people think, and you're going to laugh because I've just heard unbelievable stories, that the anti-Semitic incidents are not that bad. And we Jews are suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome. Okay? What I can tell you is, I know that I do that a little bit. Where I live in the recent year or two, we had actually Ku Klux Klan pamphlets in our mailbox. I immediately got scared and took down my mezuzah, okay, over my door. It's back. Okay. But knowing the history of democratic Germany before 1933, listening to politicians blame all of this on Soros or whatever, I think what I've heard from the other speakers is obviously this is serious. The uptick is enormous. Again, I'm talking many times to sixth graders, seventh graders, eighth graders. Okay? I'm talking to schools in North Philadelphia that are all Black, who ask amazing questions. I talk to Catholic schools, okay? And obviously, I'm talking to a school system in upstate Pennsylvania. I'm talking to an all-boys school, changing the topic to what happened? How did this happen? Telling the story of the Holocaust is vitally important. But the truth is, how do you teach it? And what comes next? How do you fight anti-Semitism?
Thank you,
Those
Dina. Oh, Dina, I'm going to stop you right now because it's 8:03 and I want to do a couple quick questions.
Okay.
So I do want to ask a couple questions. So there's been an overall rise in hate crimes in many communities, not just the Jewish community. We can see this with the Asian community. Is the rise in anti-Semitism connected to this overall rise in hate crimes, or do you view it as separate from the overall rise? And this question is for Andrew and Congressman Manning.
Congresswoman Manning, do you want to go first, or would you like me to?
Well, I think there are a variety of reasons that we're seeing a rise in many different kinds of hate crime. I personally believe that the last president opened Pandora's box by making it publicly acceptable to say hateful things about minority groups. And I believe anti-Semitism has always been under the surface, but when public figures say terrible things about immigrants, about Jews, about people of color, it makes it seem acceptable. And so I think that people are willing to say things that might have been considered impolite previously. I also think we've seen a rise of white supremacists in the United States and across the globe. And I know from briefings that we've had from the State Department that the online activity of white supremacists and white nationalists is global, that they're sharing their hateful ideology. And as Eden said, the social media companies, because of the algorithms they use, people who find their way into that kind of rhetoric just see more and more of it online. So I think there are a wide variety of reasons. We've also seen a rise in authoritarian governments, and authoritarian governments tend to result in the othering of minority groups. All those things contribute to the rise of hatred in general, but also anti-Semitism.
The only thing I would really add here is in the fact that the numbers obviously don't lie, the stories don't lie. We've clearly seen a rise in anti-Semitism, but we have seen a rise in hate. And as ADL's mission always has been, we can't fight one form without fighting another, because we see it everywhere. With the pandemic, saw an immense rise towards the Asian American and Chinese American community specifically. But then we saw anti-Semitic tropes related to that as well. One of the factors that I think just adds to the rise in anti-Semitism is the spread, which is more in the last decade, the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, which is the theory that white culture is being replaced by Black and brown people, that white people are being replaced by Black and brown people, and that a Jewish cabal is spearheading that. It's the rationale that the murderer in the Tree of Life massacre used for why he committed his massacre. And it's also the rationale that the shooter used in the Top Supermarket massacre for picking the neighborhood that he did as well. So I think we're in a time when we're coming out of, and I guess we're now officially out of the pandemic. I guess that's been officially announced. At a time of anxiety, of financial uncertainty, changes in technology and society, and a pandemic, whenever anxiety rises, we always see people looking for scapegoats, and any minority group can be the target of that. I think that's why we see anti-Semitism in any group, and all groups that we're seeing that rise.
And then my next question is, I think we can all agree that criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitism. We have Israelis here in the United States protesting, and in Israel against the current government. How do we distinguish between legitimate criticism of Israel and illegitimate criticism of Israel? I'll give this to Eden and Andrew and Congresswoman Manning.
So it's very simple, I think. There's a test that we utilize that was created by Natan Sharansky, who's brilliant, and it's called the 3D test. If you delegitimize Israel's right to exist, if you demonize Israel, and if you hold Israel to double standards, then it's rooted in anti-Semitism. Criticism of policy is not. And I think it's amazing what we're seeing in Israel today with the protesters who are protesting Israel's government and who are able to criticize specific policy and certainly not delegitimizing Israel's right to exist. In fact, it's very rooted in Zionist and love of the country. So I think and sometimes it gets a little murky to see the difference, but and not to always pick on the New York Times, because I also am a reader of the New York Times, but when the New York Times is sending 500 push notifications about what's happening in Israel and maybe one on what's happening in China or something else, that's an obsessive focus on Israel, and I think can also have an argument made there. Of course, like sharing blood libel, lying about Israel, like criticizing Israel and lying about it is also typically rooted in anti-Semitism. And I think, I'll open the floor to anyone else who wants to.
Congresswoman Manning and then Andrew.
I think what Eden said is exactly correct. I think using those 3 Ds is the statement delegitimizing Israel? Is it demonizing Israel? And I put a heavy emphasis on the double standard. I have been asked to sign on, for example, a lot of letters in the past couple months calling out Israel for what is going on there. And one of the things that I think to myself is, have I been asked to sign on a letter? Prime Minister Modi is taking actions that I think are anti-democratic in his country. Nobody's asked me to sign on a letter asking him what to do. There's a lot of activity going on in France. Macron is very unpopular right now for what he's doing for Social Security. Nobody has asked me to sign on a letter telling Emmanuel Macron what he should be doing in his country. So I think the double standard is something that we have to be thinking about on a regular basis. And by the way, for friends who are talking about what's going on in Israel just shows what a terrible country it is. I think what we see in Israel right now is a remarkably thriving democracy. We've seen what, 8 weeks of protests now, hundreds of thousands of people protesting in the streets to maintain a democracy. No one has been killed. No one has been significantly injured. I don't know there is an incredible democracy in Israel, and anybody who's calling it out, using this as an excuse to demonize Israel is using a double standard.
Andrew, do you want to add to that?
The only thing I would add, because I also saw the comment in the chat, the 3Ds, and then at ADL, we do also are a proponent of the IHRA definition as well in using that. My co-panelists eloquently answered this, I agree.
So we are running short of time. I extended this till 8:15. So I do have a question that I would like all of our panelists to give their own answer to. So we see all these statistics and we see what's happening with respect to students and what's happening all over the United States and frankly, all over the world. So we want to know what we can do in our own lives on how to combat anti-Semitism. So, you know, anti-Semitism has been around as long as there have been Jews, unfortunately. There's a reason it's called the oldest hatred. So I'm going to start with Congresswoman Manning. What can we do and how can we support what's happening in Washington?
So, well, you can support Congress people who do the work you think is important to combat anti-Semitism. Make sure that you are supporting people who are supporting the values you care about. But I want to mention that Andrew listed 4 things in his remarks that was in the PowerPoint that everybody can do. And I'd like to add a couple more things. Number one, I think it's important for all of us to work to create allies outside of the Jewish community. There aren't enough of us to combat anti-Semitism on our own. So it's important for us to foster strong relationships with members of the Black community, with members of the Hispanic community, with our neighbors and the people that we work with. And I'll tell you, in my community, we create those relationships. Number one, we do interfaith trips to Israel every couple of years, and we make sure that that the interfaith trips have people from a cross section of the community. And then when they come back, we have regular meetings to make sure we're building those relationships with non-Jews. And when there are issues that are important to them, we stand up with those issues. And some of those issues are also important to us, issues like immigration and healthcare and education. The last thing that I'll mention is we have to find ways to create positive experiences that people have with Jews and with the Jewish community. In my own community, we every year have a Jewish festival. And when we first introduced the idea, everybody was terrified that it would create, that we'd be putting ourselves in danger by advertising a Jewish festival. To the contrary, now I don't know what things would be like in your communities, but we have an incredible number of non-Jews come to the Jewish festival and they enjoy it. They eat the food, they take tours of whatever synagogue it's held at. And we have to create positive interactions with the Jewish community, not just so that people have experiences that go beyond what they may encounter on TV or online.
I agree. We are a joyful people with a joyful, uplifting religion that always focuses on life over death. So I do think it is really important to show the joy. And Eden, you can tell us what you're doing to that effect, because part of what you do at a wider frame and what you're doing is trying to show positive images of Jews. So can you talk about, in your view, how to combat anti-Semitism?
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, that is a major goal and both a wider frame and the new media company that I'm launching soon. And I think, you know, to that point, we really need to invest in Jewish youth and invest time and money in social media efforts, because I mean, as much as we all feel very allergic to that, that's where their eyes are, that's where they are, and that could actually really shape their reality. And it's why I am investing so much into that. And you know, a lot of people don't want to have to start teaching them about such ugly things so young. And it's of course, the pride is there, the fun stuff is there, but we also need to combat what they're going to see, because they will see it, whether we want them to or not. It's everywhere, the bad stuff. So I think we need to make better engagement opportunities. I agree with Congresswoman Manning. That's super important, and involve and consult young people in decision making. And certainly, if we're going to spend a lot of money on something, see how young people respond before we move forward with it. Jewish education, same thing. I think we actually need to confront the misinformation they're seeing. I think Jewish education generally needs to approach things a lot differently. We need to hold, our schools accountable, that they're not teaching anti-Semitic material, and that if they are teaching, Holocaust, or if they have any sort of Jewish teaching whatsoever, we can also have them include modern day anti-Semitism so they know how to connect it to what's happening today. That's a big oversight, I think, in education generally. And I think just understanding how social media works, and that it's not even just young people, it's everyone now gets their news on social media, and a lot of people don't even need like a resource like that's a trustable resource in order to do it. So I think seriously investing in that, and social media and media and engagement opportunities. And I think one last point is no matter what occupation you're in, you can think about ways to institute DEI initiatives, like good DEI initiatives, like Jewish sensitivity training or Jewish historical literacy in the workplace, understanding anti-Semitism, writing IRA into an employee handbook. All of these things could be great too, no matter sort of where you are in the spectrum.
Thank
Jill,
you.
can I have one more thing that I
Sure.
meant to mention earlier? A couple years ago, Congress enacted a bill called the Never Again Act, and that requires the U.S. Holocaust Museum to to analyze Holocaust education around the country and to provide Holocaust education for teachers. And much of this is online. It is critically important for us to make sure in our communities that the teachers in our schools know about the opportunity to get Holocaust education through the Holocaust Museum. There are programs every summer where teachers can get funding to come attend in person, but there are also online courses that teachers can take. And we need to take advantage of this, because every year the Holocaust Museum puts out a report about the state of Holocaust education across the country. And I think it's a wonderful a wonderful resource that we have out there. And final pitch, you will see coming out of Congress some bills that are called the Parents Bill of Rights. I refer to it as the book banning bill. There is a concerted effort across the country to ban books from school libraries, and some of the books that are being banned are Diary of Anne Frank, Mouse, the graphic novel about the Holocaust. Parents are objecting that things that are found in books about the Holocaust are too upsetting for their children. So find out what's happening where you live and make sure to stand up against any kind of book banning. I put an amendment in the bill. I tried to get an amendment in there to prevent the banning of books. Of course, it was overridden, but we all need to be aware of what's going on, because kids need to be able to read about these things and teachers need to be able to teach about these things.
I agree fully. Dina and Andrew, you each get 1 minute because we're really, really out of time. So Dina, what's your 1 minute pitch? And Andrew.
My 1 minute pitch is to talk about yourself. Tell people who may not know who you are or that you're Jewish. And I'm going to give you a fast example. My stepson runs a company in Boston that works with AEDs. When all that happened with the football player, he got 1 million calls for AEDs. One of the people who called him was a local football coach and asked if he would donate it. He did. He donated the AED. He donated teaching people CPR. The coach took him out to lunch. They were chatting. The coach said to him, "Your parents really raised you right." And my stepson said, "Well, those Jewish values," and before he could finish, the coach looked at him and said, "You're Jewish?" Because obviously in his mind, Jews don't give away things. So talk about who you are, talk about your family, talk about, that Jews have been here forever and we do good things. We're good people, and not shy away the way I did for most of my life, out of fear.
Thank you, Dina. And Andrew, I'm gonna let you finish. What do you want us all to do?
No pressure with the final word here.
Right. Sorry.
Everything that has been said, and I put the 4 pieces in the PowerPoint, so please refer back to that from that. But I would say, don't let fear, much like Dina was just saying, don't let fear keep you from engaging. Whether it's fighting anti-Semitism, whether it's going out there and helping show the beauty of Jewish culture, whether it's inviting some people who aren't Jewish to a Passover Seder, or to I've got my kid's bar mitzvah coming up in a year and a half.
Mazel tov.
The planning on that one. I think showing the joy of Judaism and not allowing fear to take over and pushing back against that fear is what we can all do to fight anti-Semitism and hate.
So I want to thank everyone for being here. We went over by 22 minutes, but there's a lot to talk about. Thank you, Congresswoman Manning. Thank you, Eden Cohen. Thank you, Andrew Goretsky. Thank you, Dina Lichtman-Smith. Thank all of you for being here. This will be available on our YouTube channel, and I will send it out. And if anyone is interested, we will be supporting a Jewish candidate who you may be familiar with, Adam Fresh, who lost only by 635 votes to Lauren Boebert. And that event is on May 3rd at 5:30 if you're interested in hearing, and Senator Bennett will be on that call as well, and that's a Zoom. Because we need more Jews in Congress to be with Kathy and others. So thank you again. Thank you to all the Jewish Battleground partner folks. Thank you to the DJOP board always for their support, and thank all of you. And have a good evening. And Eden, I think it's like afternoon where you are. So
Yeah.
okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.